So we've got more Brexit tomfoolery, and what more tomfoolery could you have than not only it being a typical Brexit story, one of the government being, well, controlled by absolute clowns, but now we have the absolute ridiculous case of parliamentary sovereignty being questioned, because apparently this is what Brexiteers wanted and what they voted for, but when parliamentary sovereignty is a problem for them, for example, then it's not a bigger issue. It's only an issue if we want to, you know, leave the EU, but when the issue of sovereignty comes upon them, then that's where it gets a problem. So for those of you who don't know, last month there was a vote in Parliament for Parliament to release the 58 Brexit impact studies that had been done by David Davis's office to leave the office to exit the European Union, also known as Drex. But you know, there you go. So he'd had a bill from Parliament that said you must release these documents. Now, when he released these documents were highly edited. They weren't just edited, they were highly edited. And that's a very important distinction to make in a lot of these things, because a highly edited document basically meant all the real important and pertinent information that the ministers wanted to see, like what the impact of Brexit was going to be on the economy and what the alternatives were going to be once we left, were basically blanked out. The ministers couldn't see the information. It was basically, we have a farming economy, this is it. You know, that was basically the information that had been offered. So here you have a funny situation where David Davis is in contempt of Parliament. And now you have literally a case of, if he hasn't released the information by the end of this week, he could be in a lot of hot water. In fact, Parliament could indeed force the issue again. But, of course, the Brexiteers come to a, shall we say, a trying to close down a actual public vote by basically having another vote to rescind another vote. Because the whole problem is, as David Davis claims and Rees-Mogg claims and all these other Brexiteers claim, well, we can't have this information out in the open because it's pertinent to negotiations. That's the type of information that we as the general public, and probably ministers who are going to go forward and make other votes, probably should want to know as well. In fact, I want to know this information before we leave as well, because it's probably going to confirm even more that Brexit is just an absolutely awful idea. Why the hell are ministers now proposing another potential vote to now say, oh yeah, all that information that we said we'd put out in full, that we didn't put out in full, we're now going to do a vote to say, yeah, we're not putting it out in full. This is an absolute travesty, and anyone who voted leave for the express opinion that Parliament should be the top legal authority in this country, congratulations, your parliamentary sovereignty is being reduced to ridiculous levels. There was a good article before, during the referendum, and it basically said, if we leave the EU, you are essentially handing the UK over to the most right-wing government the UK has ever had. Are you prepared for that outcome? Because I don't think a lot of people really are, because there's a lot of bad stuff going through Parliament I don't agree with, in terms of not only just Brexit, but in terms of just general stuff happening day to day. You've had recently another benefit freeze for people who are on benefits. And here's the thing, many people go, oh, you know, they're receiving, you know, 20,000 a year, but no one who receives benefits ever receives the full benefits. So let's make that first thing clear. The second thing is when you look at the social welfare bill, which social benefits do come under, they only make up 22% of the total benefit spending we actually spend money on. The money we actually spend most on are pensions. So who do you think they don't want to upset? The people who are unemployed or the people who are receiving a lot of pensions? But bear in mind what happened with the fuel tax over the last election. You can tell that they don't want to upset the people on the pensions the most. Now, this also comes under another problem, because if you aren't going to raise the total amount of benefits that people can receive, then what do you do when Brexit, as it will inevitably, as it has already been doing, raising prices on food, clothing, and other such things? This is a big problem, because if you freeze that, then you're basically telling people they don't have as much money as they used to. And we're not talking about, stuff for entertainment. We're basically talking basic living necessities. And under this, government, guess what? More and more people have had to rely on food banks. Something that Jacob Rees-Mogg says, oh, it's brilliant because it resolves the Christian sense of charity. People shouldn't have to be relying on charity in order to survive. This isn't the Victorian era workhouse Mr. Mogg seems to think that can come back into place in Britain. It's all wonderful. No. People deserve at least a minimum of respect, because what happens when you don't give them benefits? People will turn to alternatives, and most likely those alternatives will be crime. But of course, this have been severe cuts to the police force, and of course, as was said at the time, it will be absolutely horrible. Enough said about that. So, back to our original point. Parliamentary sovereignty. It's a thing. It's a thing we've always had, even when we were members of the EU. And unless you want to point out to me, as I constantly say, please point out a time where the EU has gone, you must implement this law. Please point to me a time where also the EU, for example, has said, yeah, we're getting rid of that law, you can't have that law anymore. It's never happened. Parliament has always been the top sovereign body in this nation. So now that we're leaving the EU and you have this parliamentary sovereignty, how do you feel now that your parliamentary sovereignty is being questioned? I'd love to hear that.